Everybody knows Horus, and if you don't, you've probably wandered into the wrong corner of the warp. He was the emperor of mankind's favorite child and the first Warmaster of the Imperium. You would think that someone that was raised with a silver spoon by a 12-foot-tall space Jesus would have a great life, right? Wrong. Horus eventually became humanity's greatest traitor. He was basically the popular quarterback that peaked in high school, but eventually went nowhere with his ambitions. Throw in an early receding hairline, and it was a recipe for disaster. Instead of settling for a hair transplant in Turkey or some therapy, he opted for the Horus Heresy, a civil war so catastrophic it made the Death Star look like a backyard sparkler. He ended up killing his favorite brother, billions died, worlds were reduced to space dust, and all because he wanted to play musical chairs with the throne. The hilarious part is he still lost, but we can't blame him for this. It's not all his fault. Horus pulling a reverse Uno on his dad and the Imperium was a much deeper problem. Let's look at reason number 1. It sucked to be Horus. Horus and his superhuman brothers were originally created in a test tube by his immortal mother, Erda, and his father, the Emperor of Mankind. But due to some parental drama, and maybe thanks to the Chaos Gods playing Jerry Springer, these super babies were scattered across the galaxy. Horus ends up landing on a shithole planet named Cthonia, a mining world overrun by barbarian gangs. Imagine landing in cartel-controlled Mexico, but with worse Wi-Fi and more shivs. He was discovered by Space El Chapo that went by the name of Krakduk. He raised Horus to become a lean, mean, gang-killing machine. But just when Horus was getting good at being the galaxy's edgiest child, he stumbled upon the gestation pod that delivered him to this backwater planet. The tech priests of the Mechanicum had arrived first and was excavating it. Horus, in peak feral mode, had no clue who these toaster-loving weirdos were, so naturally, he killed one and bolted back to his gang's hideout. Krakduk was not thrilled because Horus basically led their enemies to their headquarters. Sure enough, the Mechanicum started digging into their hideout and the whole place collapsed. Most of the gang didn't make it. Krakduk, on his deathbed, instructs Horus to kill him. Horus obliged. After completing the deed, memories flooded in. He remembered the galaxy, advanced tech, and who he was supposed to be. His body even pulled a Hulk routine, bulking up like he just downed an entire vial of warp tren. By the time the toaster worshippers finally dug through the wreckage, they weren't staring at a scrappy gang kid anymore. They were staring at a full Primarch activated. And in the most dramatic voice, he proclaimed himself Horus. This was the first reason Horus got screwed over. The guy spent his formative years soaking up gang culture like a sponge in a cesspool. Raised in a den of organized crime, he became the textbook definition of product of his environment. And let's be real. Gang life isn't exactly Hogwarts. Backstabbing, power plays, and turf wars are just regular Tuesday activities. In that kind of setting, being a sneaky, ambitious snake isn't just tolerated, it's practically on-the-job application. So it's no shocker that Horus picked up a few traits that would later pave his way to Chaos fandom. Sprinkle in a spicy temper, and you've got the perfect recipe for galactic betrayal. Honestly, his turn to the dark side isn't shocking. It's like raising a kid in a piranha tank and being surprised when they bite someone. After Horus is found, he's brought to Terra and pledges loyalty to the Emperor, and he receives command of the Luna Wolves, a legion composed of warriors from his homeworld, Cthonia. Together, they embark on the Great Crusade to unify the galaxy. Horus proves himself a master tactician and diplomat, demonstrating the ability to unite different factions through his deep understanding of human psychology. He skillfully adapts to each world's cultural traditions, fostering peaceful negotiations that often bypassed bloodshed, using his natural charisma and the overwhelming might of the Space Marine legions to bring planets into imperial compliance without force. But Horus was a proud, egotistical motherfucker. He soaked up all the love and responsibility Big E showered on him like a starved dog in a petting zoo. After all, he was the Emperor's one true son. Well, until Big E decided to find the rest of his scattered spawn. Left in charge of the entire army while Dad went on his little intergalactic treasure hunt, Horus swore to himself that he would never lose the title of favorite child. When the second Primarch, Leman Russ, was discovered, Horus was low-key jealous. He regarded Russ as a savage, furry drunk that you couldn't trust. But Big E reminded him that Russ had already tamed half a world more barbaric than Cthonia. Hell, he would have conquered the entirety of Fenris if he had not swooped in to stop him. Basically, the Emperor said, "Stop sucking your own dick, Russ is way more badass." Over time, the Emperor reunites more of the Primarchs, and he urges Horus to get along with them. So, out of loyalty, he does. After the Ultramar Crusade, where the Imperium wrecks the greatest orc empire ever known, Horus gets a promotion from supervisor to CEO. In other words, the Emperor granted him the title of Warmaster, the second in command only to Big E himself. Then the Emperor left to get milk on Terra and never returned because he was busy working on the Webway project. Now, you'd think Horus would be living the dream, top of the food chain, bossing around his brothers. But, surprise, the Warmaster title didn't exactly go down smooth with every Primarch. Some of them were seriously pissed, Angron, Perturabo, and Curzi in particular. These guys didn't think Horus should have been the one with the crown. Angron had been through some shit and thought he deserved something for all his inadequacies. Perturabo had spent his whole life as a corporate slave for Big E, and Curzi, well, he was just being himself, unpredictable and homicidal. On the flip side, Lehman Russ and Lionel Johnson bitterly accepted, but definitely thought they could have done a better job. Guilliman and Dorn supported the decision simply because of duty. But then we had the Day 1 squad, Fulgrim, Mortarion, and Sanguinius. These guys were all in on Horus's ascension. They didn't just support him, they bent their knees like they were Jon Snow submitting to Daenerys Targaryen. This was the second reason Horus got screwed over. His promotion to Warmaster was a brutal shift, thrusting him from commanding a single legion to overseeing the vast Imperial army without any preparation or lube. To add to this shit show, the Emperor suddenly left, leaving Horus to manage a galaxy-spanning crusade while wrangling his egotistical, unstable Primarch siblings. The Primarchs, prone to rivalry and petty squabbles, demanded constant timeouts, forcing Horus to juggle their egos, assign roles, and settle disputes. If two of his brothers got into a dick measuring contest, it was his job to make sure they walked away without any scars. This probably planted seeds of hatred between brothers, or even against Horus himself, that was eventually exploited during the heresy. He was probably stressed to the max and riddled with self-doubt, and if he had any hair left, it was probably gone by then. The lack of guidance, direction, and insecurities made him an easy target for the Chaos Gods. Despite all this, Horus doesn't actually go full Anakin Skywalker until he almost dies on the planet of Davin. Dude gets stabbed by a shit-stained prison shank, and Erebus, the Chaos MVP, shows up to help. While Horus is unconscious and dreaming, the Chaos Gods slide into his DMs and gaslight him worse than your ex-girlfriend. They show him a highlight reel of a dystopian future where the Emperor attains godhood and tosses the Primarchs aside. The bitch-ass Erebus sweet-talks Horus into believing that the Chaos Gods are misunderstood souls and that they mean no harm to the material world. And for the finale, Erebus drops the mic by revealing that the Emperor used the warp itself to create the Primarchs. For Horus, this was less of a revelation and more of a full-on existential crisis. A realization that his entire existence was sponsored by warp shenanigans. He was already salty from Big E ghosting him for a secret project on Terra. But just when you think it couldn't get worse, the Emperor formed the Council of Terra. And who gets a seat at the table? Not the Primarchs. Instead, it's a committee of regular humans who immediately decide to flex their power by slapping newly conquered worlds with the taxes that would make the IRS accountants cry. For Horus, this was the final straw. The guy who united the galaxy with his brothers was now sidelined for Karen and her HR meetings. This set him off and started the infamous Horus Heresy. This was reason number 3 why being Horus absolutely sucked. He worshipped the Emperor like a kid idolizing their favorite superhero, only to get shanked with a poop knife and reminded that he and his brothers were disposable, just like the Thunder Warriors before them. Turns out, they weren't the Emperor's sons. They were his tools. Oh, and don't forget, Horus had pride. For the Primarchs and their Astartes legions to be replaced by squishy humans was an insult. It was as bad as putting pineapple on pizza. They were the ones that bled in wars to unite the Imperium. Where were these bureaucratic wet noodles when Horus and his brothers were dying to unite the Imperium? And to top it all off, the taxes were brutal. Yeah, Horus hated the IRS as much as the working class. These newly conquered worlds were barely holding it together, and the Council of Terra was already nickel and diming them like space Scrooges. Wounds were fresh, cities were rubble, and now the Imperium was requiring them to pay for the privilege to be conquered. Horus knew it wouldn't take much for rebellions to spark, and if that happened, the Imperium would be wasting even more resources stomping out fires they started. That concludes today's episode. Please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Feel free to leave a comment below on what faction I should cover next. Also, if you want to support the channel, please visit my shop in the link in the description for some Warhammer 40K LEGO figures.